Before we get started, support for this show comes from Boulder Strategic Consulting. You can drive your business strategy with a digital plan that unites and engages your team. Boulder Strategic Consulting can bridge the gap between your technology and marketing departments. You need insights to inspire business transformation. Boulder will empower you to thrive in a digital world. You don't have to stress out about your digital transformation projects anymore. Let Boulder Strategic Consulting come in and help you and your team reach success. Find out more at boulderstrategy.com. That's BOLDR strategy.com. What if I told you there was a new way to make important decisions that could impact every industry everywhere and could even change the way we look at how we conduct elections? I was really looking forward to this interview with Dr. Louis-Rosenberg, and for me at least, it did not disappoint. Immediately following the live interview, which, as I'm recording this, was just yesterday, I received emails from people thanking me. I even received one email from someone who wants me to be at their annual meeting when they put the technology we talk about in this interview to use. I am not kidding. Incredible stuff. And this was one of those interviews that I really am thankful that I had the chance to do. And I'm also looking forward to more work coming from the wonderful researcher that we interview in this episode, Dr. Louis-Rosenberg. All right. So here we go, folks. A few weeks ago, I saw a tweet from my friend Adrian Segar, who literally wrote the book on unconferences. And he was discussing the wisdom of crowds, sharing why an unconference would always be the better choice to a conference designed using a conference curator or one expert who helped craft a vision for what the conference should be. And this created sort of a controversial discussion online, and it got me thinking about an interesting option, a sort of yes and moment. And that came from a segment that I watched in an episode of a new Amazon Prime Video docuseries. It was just released February 22nd, called This Giant Beast That Is the Global Economy. And I remembered one segment in particular featuring a researcher talking with the host, Cal Penn, about collective intelligence using swarm AI technology that could harness all of the best wisdom from a group of people and make extremely accurate decisions. And I wondered, could this technology be used to make better conferences or for associations of every industry facing tremendous change and disruption? Could swarm AI or hive intelligence help make strategic decisions about an organization's mission? Anyone who sees value in small data, big data, qualitative, quantitative research, any leader who makes decisions for a group of people needs to hear about our topic today. So I reached out to the researcher and his company, and our guest today received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees from Stanford, and his doctoral work focused on robotics, virtual reality, and human-computer interaction. As a researcher at the U.S. Air Force's Armstrong Labs, he created the Virtual Fixtures System, the first augmented reality platform ever built. Our guest has been awarded more than 300 patents for his technological efforts. Dr. Louis-Rosenberg is CEO and Chief Scientist of Unanimous AI, a company focused on amplifying the intelligence of networked human beings, human groups, using AI algorithms modeled after natural swarms. And today, I'm happy to welcome Louis to the show to talk with us more about these questions and so many others. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. I really have been looking forward to this, and was kind of proud of myself for, remembering and finding you from that show. But, I went through that intro really quickly, and I want to make sure we start with a definition of what we're talking about today so that people truly understand what this is all about. So can you walk us through swarm intelligence?
Sure. So, in the natural world, there is really two different types of intelligence that has evolved over millions and hundreds of millions of years.
Mhm.
There's neurological intelligence, which is basically what we think of in our brains. It's networks of neurons that are so deeply connected that with billions and billions of neurons in your head, intelligence emerges from this dense network of connections. Most people think of that as being the only form of intelligence in nature, but biologists have discovered that there is another level of intelligence, which is swarm intelligence. And that is, it's evolved usually in social species like birds and bees and fish, where they have these large groups, large organizations. You could think of them as associations, and they have a large group of individuals. They're all out there in the world getting different perspectives on their environment, collecting different bits of information. And what swarm intelligence does is say, hey, can a group combine their various perspectives in an optimal way and actually connect together so deeply that they function as a super intelligence? And biologists refer to this as a superorganism. And so out there in the natural world, a swarm of bees can make remarkable decisions by functioning as a super intelligence. A school of fish can make remarkable decisions by functioning as a super intelligence. Same with flocks of birds, and in fact, countless social species. And it comes down to this fact that they can leverage all their unique perspectives and become significantly smarter together than they could be on their own. And my interest came from this fact of, hey, if birds and bees and fish can get so much smarter together, why can't we people do it?
Right.
We didn't evolve the capability naturally, but what we've been working on here at Unanimous AI for the last 5 years is to say, hey, if can we use AI technologies and networking technologies to connect groups of people together over the internet and allow them to have the same benefits? And it turns out that we can, and we can make groups of people significantly smarter by having them connect together into these systems modeled after natural swarms. And I should say that from a biologist perspective, the word swarm refers to all of these types of organizations, whether it's a school of fish or a flock of birds or a swarm of bees. A biologist would refer to that as a swarm, and this emergent intelligence as a swarm intelligence.
I mean, it's fascinating because it's association chat. Associations are known for associating. We're known for bringing people together, and we have our own swarms, And so figuring out how to empower humans so that we're able to better use these communities that we already have just seems like a natural progression, seems like a natural thing that we need to figure out how to do. And I want to go into that a little bit more, but you spoke about this we haven't developed this naturally as humans, and we're social animals. We need community to survive. We haven't developed it naturally, but we're developing it through Unanimous AI and the work that you're doing. And so what that makes me think of is all of these human versus machine, human versus AI, these dire predictions about how, we're sunk because we're creating something that's going to take over, and the AI is going to be smarter than we are. What I found fascinating in some of the other interviews with you is that, and your TED Talk, is about this idea that maybe not. Maybe in this case, humans can come out ahead. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. So, this on the broader topic of AI,
Yeah.
I am of the belief that AI can be dangerous, and which is surprising because I'm the CEO of an AI company.
What are you doing?
Right. And it's really because we are really a very different type of AI company. So most AI companies are looking at big data, and they're doing analysis of big data, machine learning on big data, so that they can basically replace people with algorithms. They find patterns in these huge data sets, and they can replace people with algorithms, and and that's a little bit scary because they're starting from this assumption that people are simple enough in terms of their views and opinions and values and insights that they can be reduced down to these data sets. Then they process these data sets, come up with patterns that they can then use to replace people, and it's already creating biases and other problems. But it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because these AI systems are going to get smarter and smarter. We're going to get more and more dependent on them, and they are not going to be the same as real human values, real human insights, real human sensibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so my interest in this entire space was to say, hey, is there a better way to build a super intelligence? The traditional AI way is to say, let's replace people with algorithms. But if you look to nature, you could say, hey, nature has addressed this problem before, where there's been large groups of organisms, and they've found ways to basically combine their insights and allow them to perform together as a super intelligence. And again, it goes back to the birds and the bees. Flocks of birds and schools and swarms of bees can be thousands of times smarter together than they can be on their own in terms of their decision-making capabilities. And so my focus and the focus of the team here at Unanimous AI is to say, hey, can we use AI to connect people together, enable super intelligence, but not by replacing people, by amplifying people. And what we find is when we connect groups of people together, they can be significantly smarter. They can make more accurate predictions, more accurate forecasts, more accurate diagnoses, have insights that are more generalizable, make better decisions. But at the same time, they're maintaining their natural values and morals and insights and sensibilities and opinions. We're not replacing people. We're allowing people to become smarter together. And so to me, that's a much safer approach for pursuing superintelligence, by keeping people in the loop, as opposed to what a lot of researchers are doing, which is finding ways of replacing people with straight algorithms. I can give you, just to get a sense of how powerful this is, I can give you some examples. One recent example that I think is particularly interesting is we had a collaboration. We actually have an ongoing collaboration with Stanford Medical School, where the idea was, and the interesting thing about the medical field is that there's actually a lot of doctors who are afraid of AI replacing their jobs.
Yeah.
You would think of all the jobs that are out there in the world, doctors would be the least afraid. But in certain parts of medicine, doctors are on the front line of potentially being replaced by machines. And the doctors who are the most afraid are radiologists.
Mm.
And as radiologists, they look at X-rays and CAT scans and MRIs, and there's been a bunch of researchers who have created straight algorithms that can process these images and do just as well as human doctors. Wow. And so Stanford Medical School came to us and said, hey, let's see if we can take the crown back for humans by, instead of replacing doctors with algorithms, let's see if we can connect together small groups of doctors in swarms. And so we have a software platform we call Swarm, and Stanford Medical School did a study where they had small groups of doctors, 6 doctors to 8 doctors, who logged into Swarm, and then they would diagnose chest X-rays together as a system. And so the chest X-rays would pop up on their screens, and they would diagnose whether or not the patients had pneumonia or not. as a swarm. And what we found is that when they were working together in the swarm software, and we can talk about how that works in a little bit, they're connected together by AI. The study showed that they reduced their diagnostic errors by over 30%. So they had 30% fewer errors when diagnosing chest X-rays when connected together as a swarm, as compared to how they would perform individually. Mm-hmm. Also, they compared this against the straight algorithms, and this group was 20% more accurate than the straight machine learning algorithms. So it took the crown back for humans.
Yes.
That's really kind of the approach that we take, which is to say, hey, people are smart. People are really smart. People have knowledge and wisdom and insight and intuition. We take it for granted, but it's massively powerful. We have so much experience in our heads, and instead of just looking to algorithms, let's connect people together, amplify their intelligence, and we can get the power of AI while still maintaining the real value of human wisdom.
I mean, that's the part that I think is so fascinating, because there's so much about this that is, but I mean, how do you look at wisdom and figure out how to quantify, how do you make an algorithm out of wisdom? Like what do you do? And a little bit of this and a little bit of that, hesitation here and, confidence there. How do you do that? It's just fascinating.
Right. So the interesting thing is we are not trying to build wisdom. We're trying to capture wisdom, meaning the humans in the system are bringing their wisdom. And what we do is we allow groups of people to connect together as a system. And so if you think back, this idea of getting the most out of a group. Let's say I have a group of 20 people, and I want to get the most out of their insights. And they all have different perspectives, different experiences. They might have different views on the world. If they're business people, they might have different specialties. And so they all have, really valuable piece of information. How can we combine them in the best way? Well, the traditional way that has been done, sometimes people refer to as the wisdom of crowds, which is to take a vote or a poll. I can take a poll or a vote. People can give their input. And when you do that, you do see the group get a little bit smarter. This wisdom of crowds effect works, but it's using techniques that are 100 years old. There's some big issues with just taking a vote or a poll, which is that you're assuming when you take that vote or poll that everybody's feelings have equal levels of conviction, equal levels of confidence. But really, people have very different levels of conviction and confidence. And so what we do in Swarm is we instead of taking a vote or a poll, we create a system. And the system, a lot of people say it looks a little bit like a Ouija board. Because
it makes you wonder about some of these old, where it's like, how did it know? And it's like, maybe we were working on this early, Yeah.
But what happens is a question will appear on everybody's screen at the same time. And that's the thing about a swarm is it's synchronous, meaning everybody's participating together. A vote or a poll, people will just give their data as in isolation as individuals. You call it a crowd, but there really isn't a crowd. It's just a bunch of individuals, and then the crowd exists in somebody's spreadsheet somewhere when they find an average. A swarm is really a group that is coming together. They're logging in at the same time. They're all questions appearing on all their screens at the same time, and then they have an interface where they basically a question appears on all their screens, a bunch of answers appear. And they have a little magnet where they can pull the swarm in a direction, and everybody's pulling in different directions. And so you have this kind of multi-directional tug of war, people pushing and pulling. And then the AI algorithms are watching all their behaviors, how they're pulling against each other, because they're basically interacting. And the algorithms are saying, well, which people are very confident in their opinions, which people have have very low conviction, which people, and there might be a variety of different options. So which people are, are confident with respect to some options, but maybe ambivalent with respect to others. And with all that happening in real time, the swarm starts moving in a direction and it finds the path to the answer that maximizes the collective conviction of the group. And the results are always really, really powerful. So I'll give you another example. So one of the things that we do a lot is we take on challenges from journalists, and Newsweek challenged us to predict the Oscars this way. And I should say, like, we as a company, we don't know anything about the Oscars. We don't have a big data set about the Oscars. We just know we can amplify the intelligence of people. And so we invited in to the platform 50 movie fans, not experts, just regular movie fans. All they need is a browser. They can log in from anywhere in the country. They log in to the Swarm platform, and then we ask them to predict each of the different categories of the Oscars. And so the question pops up on their screen: who's going to win Best Actor? The actors appear, and then they basically swarm and they converge on an answer. And so we did this for all the categories. We gave the results back to Newsweek, and the Newsweek published the predictions, which puts pressure on us. We were 94% accurate in predicting the Oscars, which outperformed every major movie critic. They outperformed the LA Times, the New York Times, Variety, Vanity Fair. It outperformed all of the experts. And so what happened is we took just 50 regular people, combined their insights, and they became a super expert, an expert that was better than the specialists at the LA Times. And here's the most interesting thing is that we then asked those 50 people, well, how many of you have seen all the movies? None of them had seen all the movies. In fact, most of them had seen less than half the movies. But they're out there in the world. They heard different things. Some people read articles in the newspaper. Some people heard something on the radio. Some people saw some of the movies. So they all have different pieces of incomplete information. But when they come together as a swarm, they're filling in the gaps in each other's knowledge. The system is seeing, well, these people were very confident about these particular actors, while these people were confident about those actors. And it allowed the system to basically form this amplified intelligence, this artificial expert that was better than the actual experts. And we see that time and time again. And we can do the same thing for businesses or for associations. So you could imagine if you have a large community, whether it's a community of enthusiasts or a business team, and they all have different views on the world. They're out there maybe in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, and you want to be able to combine their insights in an optimal way. That's what a swarm can do. It can basically allow you to combine all their different perspectives and find that answer that is the best combination of their insights.
I love it. And actually, we have someone who's commenting about how you could change the entire betting dynamics on the Triple Crown using this tool. And yeah, I think you've been in contact with some people about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of sports forecasting. It's not because we're interested in sports. It's because it's a great test bed to demonstrate amplification of intelligence.
Right.
It's the type of thing where we can get a group of people, just regular sports fans.
Yeah.
They can log in and they can make a set of predictions, and then we can rigorously look at how did they do. And in fact, we just published a paper where we did the full NBA season, predicting we predicted over 200 basketball games during the season. We had people predicted as individuals and then predicted together as a swarm, and then we gave the different groups a simulated betting, basically simulated dollars to see how they would do. And what we found was that across these 200 games, the individuals would have lost 41% of their money by placing the bets on their own individual intuition. But when they combined their intelligence as a swarm, they averaged 170% gain against Vegas.
Wow.
And so we see this with and allowing groups to have this, to be able to make better judgments, make better decisions, whether it's, diagnosing a chest X-ray or betting on a basketball game. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about it, is that the same exact software works, whether it's a group of doctors or a group of sports fans or a group of movie fans, because the algorithms are just looking at human behaviors. They're not looking at, there's no information, we're not processing information about medical content or movie content. We're just
Yeah.
looking at human behaviors and optimizing their, how to combine their insights.
Well, so let me just say that imagine that you're at the Thanksgiving table and you're looking around the table, and there are some people that you're thinking might drag down the intelligence quotient of your swarm. You know what I'm saying? And so I can imagine that people out there are wondering, what goes into getting good results with this? Like, if you're really trying, I'm thinking of associations specifically here, but anyone who's really trying to get good results, does it matter on an individual basis, how you're figuring out who's part of this swarm,
Right. So the group, it does matter who the group is,
Mhm.
but it really depends on the questions you're asking. So I gave you the
Okay.
medical example. If I took a group of regular people off the street and asked them to diagnose chest X-rays, they're just going to be guessing, and
Yeah.
so there's going to be no amplification of intelligence. Um, on the flip side, there's a lot of questions where just regular people off the street are really insightful. And so we do a lot of projects, and we have a lot of companies using the software for doing things like product insights, marketing insights. And so in fact, we did a project for a large fast food chain where they wanted to predict how TV ads would do. And so what they would bring in groups of their customers into the platform, and then the actual TV ad would pop up on all their screens, and they would watch the ad. It was actually an advertisement for pancakes, and then the swarm would get questions about, will this advertisement drive people to go to the restaurants? And you could ask a bunch of really interesting questions. And so the way, that's a situation where what you're really thinking about is saying, hey, we can take a group of customers, turn them into a swarm, they become an artificial expert customer, and then you can interview that expert customer. Or you can create an artificial expert medical doctor by getting a group of doctors, and they can make more accurate diagnoses. But in both cases, you're picking the right population of people to come into the swarm. Now, you'd start out by saying, well, what if you have somebody who maybe is just either doesn't know very much, or they have, and that definitely happens. What we found is that it doesn't matter if we have a group of experts or a group of novices. What happens in all cases is that the swarm will be smarter than the individuals on their own. And so when we look at the difference, meaning I can take a group of regular people, and they can turn into a swarm, and they can give me more accurate insights than they would have done on their own. Or I can take a group of experts, and they will become a super expert and give more accurate insights than the experts would have done on their own. When we look at individuals to say, well, who are the best participants? Is it the person who knows the most that's the best participant? Turns out it's not the person who knows the most. It turns out it's the person who's the most self-aware, meaning
Ooh.
it's
Okay.
the people who know what they know and know what they don't know. Those are the best participants. People who are really overconfident, meaning they think they know more than they do,
Yeah.
um, they actually are less effective contributors than people who might maybe know less, but know that they know less. And we did a really interesting experiment this is with a university. I'm trying to think of the name of the university. Marist. They have the Marist poll. They're like one of the big polling universities. And we did a study where we looked at sports fans versus sports writers. Who can give more accurate forecasts, fans versus writers? And it turns out the sports fans actually gave more accurate predictions in a swarm than the sports writers. And the reason was the sports writers were all extremely overconfident. They thought they knew more than they did. And
Wow.
because they're sports writers, they've trained themselves to always look for the very unusual things to write about. So they never predict the most likely thing to happen. They predict something that's a little bit unusual because nobody will read the articles if they don't.
Otherwise,
Right.
right. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
they actually were not as effective. And so that's a situation where the sports writers probably knew more about sports than the fans, but the fans knew what they knew what they didn't know. They weren't overconfident and they became good participants.
Fascinating. Okay, because what does that mean then? There are so many things that come up with that. What does that mean then for those of us who are thinking about our boards or our panel of experts for our associations? Who would be the best in the room? Does that mean we then need to look at maybe, HR and say, have these people taken assessments that say how self-aware they are? Like maybe we don't want the people who are overly confident in the room. I don't know. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because what we've found is that people who are skilled at what they do
Hmm.
tend, tend to be self-aware, and I say that because one of the things um, that was interesting to us is that we've done lots of different projects and swarms with people who range from novices to real experts like medical doctors. I mean, the radiologists at Stanford, they went to school for 12 years to become radiologists. They're at the top of their field. They're at Stanford Medical School. You might think, well, maybe they're all going to be arrogant or all going to be overconfident, but really they're all professionals. They
Yeah.
know what they know what they don't know. We did a project with Boeing um, where Boeing actually had swarms of military pilots. And this is a really interesting project where they see Boeing's interest is to design cockpits for military aircraft, and they are always trying to get feedback from pilots, and they normally give surveys or focus groups or do interviews, and Boeing. In collaboration with the U.S. Army, did a study where they had groups of military pilots form swarms, and Boeing published a paper about it where they said the swarms gave them much more accurate insights about how the feedback about cockpits than they would get by doing a focus group. And the reason for that is that again, these pilots are probably best in they're the best at what they do. They probably if you met them, you might think they're arrogant at what they do, but you know what? But they're professionals, and they know what they
Professionals.
know, and they know what they don't know, and they were actually very effective at swarming.
Okay. Well, I want to give us a second to answer a couple of questions that have come in. One came in and it says, how are swarms identified as viable predictors? Say, how would a market react to a product? Okay. So I think I understand what this person's asking. And what do you have to say to that? How well are swarms used to predict how a market will react to a product?
It's used a lot in that way. It's one of the
Okay.
more common uses. We have projects with some of the largest companies in America where they're trying to predict how a new soft drink might be received by the markets, and they can bring in swarms of customers and make predictions. There's actually one that most of those projects are confidential, but there's one that we just did with where we actually were able to write it up as a case study, and it's actually on our
Mhm.
website. But this was just done. There's a media group called Bustle. Bustle Media Group. They're uh, the largest publication for millennial women in America, and they wanted to do a test to say, can they predict the sale of clothing in this case, it was during the holiday season, just in December of 2018. And so they did a study where they had small groups of millennial women come into the Swarm platform, and they looked at a set of 8 different sweaters, and they were asked to predict which of these sweaters would be the top the top sellers and which would be the bottom sellers. And what they found was that these swarms of these small swarms, they were each about 15 people, were able to predict with extremely high accuracy which would be the top sellers and which would be the bottom sellers. And they compared this to just a traditional survey. And the survey basically couldn't predict at all which were the top sellers and which were the bottom sellers. And so it was, and again, it's on the case study is actually on our website, but it was a really good example because they allow us to publicly talk about it. And then they actually had the sales results in January. They actually had the sales volumes that came out of the Christmas season, and so we could see, yeah, these groups were able to very accurately predict sales. We've seen other groups predicting predicting supply chain and inventory issues.
Yeah.
We have done a project with a major TV network to predict which new fall TV shows would be successful, and there they had swarms of people watch the trailers for the TV shows, and they were able to actually accurately predict which shows would get renewed, which would get canceled. And so again, what you see is that people are smart. They have really good, not just wisdom, but just intuition about not just their own opinions. And that's an interesting thing, is we don't ask people, what's your own opinion about this TV show, or what's your own opinion about that sweater? We ask people, let's predict how the public will react to this TV show.
Interesting. So yeah.
Because we're treating the individuals not as data points, we're treating individuals as data processors. We're saying, look, I could take 20 people, but they know their own feelings, they know their family's feelings, they know their neighbors, and so we can ask them to basically, they're like the bees out there in the world collecting information, and they're coming back, and then we can amplify that.
Yeah. They're not saying where I want my hive. They're saying where would be a good, where would everybody want to build this hive, right?
Right. It's one of the big differences between, say, traditional market research, where you take a poll and you just ask people their individual opinions, and a swarm where you can use much fewer people, but you're treating them as data processors. You're treating them saying, each of these people has been out there in the world, has collected huge amounts of information, knows lots and lots of other people. Let's have them work together as this collective intelligence and forecast, will these product features be successful, or will this marketing message resonate with the public? And what we find is that a group of 20 people in a swarm can outperform a survey of hundreds or even thousands of people.
Wow. I mean, that's really incredible too. And I think that, I've seen a couple of questions come in about the actual technology involved in making sure that you're getting the best types of results that you possibly can. One of the early ones, which I have to credit to Randy here, and she's a smarty. I'm proud of her. Like immediately she was like, okay, was talking about the machine biases into algorithms and how do we deal with the challenge of human nuances. And you've talked a little bit about how you're framing the questions so that people are not just answering as individuals. And you're also looking for things like overconfidence, that feeds into this algorithm. What are some other things that help to make sure that the responses or the answers that you get are the high quality and more accurate responses that you're looking for?
Yeah. So it's a great topic, and something that we think a lot about. What we find is we can bring in a population and we can get really good insights. One of the good things is an ideal population has diversity of perspectives. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if I have a group of people who all think exactly the same, then there's not much that's going to get amplified, right?
Yeah.
And so we have a group of people who already have the exact same opinion of what the right answer is. then that's the answer that's going to come out of a poll or a survey or a vote or a swarm. If you have a group of people who actually have conflicting views, who actually have they have strong opinions, they have diverse opinions, then in a swarm you'll actually see this combination of insights that allows the really the best sentiment to emerge. And so one of the things that is most interesting is when, especially when you have like a large association, right, where you have people, maybe people from all over the country or all over the world, they can log in, form a swarm, and they usually become a very, very powerful swarm because they have these diverse perspectives.
Yes. So I'm going to explain why, if you're watching this right now, we suddenly have a third person on the screen. If you're listening to this later, then it won't even matter. But if you're participating in it live, you're probably wondering, who is this lovely person who just joined them?
Who is this interloper?
And I want to introduce Tracy Betts. She's the CEO for Boulder Strategic Consulting. Tracy, you work with associations on digital transformation projects that have a lot of big questions connected with them, and projects that demand a lot of big decisions being made by leaders in charge. So I asked Tracy to come on and actually ask a couple of questions as a representative for the show's audience. Hearing all of this conversation so far, what are a few questions that you have for Louis that you've been thinking of?
Yeah, so Dr. Rosenberg, you answered the most important question to me, which is I am famous for being with full conviction, believing the BS that comes out of my mouth. So
like I am right.
I had a question as far as how does that play into? But I do have a deeper question there is, how are you determining conviction levels?
Right. So that's another really, really interesting. So one of the problems with traditional methods, like just taking a survey, is that people are very bad at reporting how they feel. You can ask people, a question, which product feature do you think is the best, and how strongly do you feel? And you could ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel about this? And A, people don't necessarily even know how they feel. But B, even if you give me a number 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, and somebody else gives me a 7, we have no idea if your scales are the same, like my internal scale and your internal scale are different. And so as a swarm, we don't ask people to report. We just get people to behave. And by behave, like I said, all the people are interacting. They have these little magnets, and it's like a multi-directional tug of war. And so the algorithms are watching how they behave. Are they pulling for an answer and quickly switching to something else when they realize that the swarm is going in a different direction? Or are they resisting and being entrenched? Or maybe they switch from one answer to a different answer in defiance of the direction the swarm is going. And so as the swarm is behaving, or as the swarm is moving, everybody is revealing a lot about themselves just by how they're interacting. And that's really what the algorithms are looking at. It's not asking people to tell us how strong their conviction is. It's just asking people to behave naturally as a group, and those things are emerging from their behaviors.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. So I read an article about how WPP was using your technology. It was the study that they did with, I think they took 2 groups of 40 participants to try to think about what the impact of the future of digital in 2022 on the retail industry.
Yep.
Right? Okay. And what I thought was really interesting is they had these 2 swarms, one representing the West, right? North America, Europe, South Africa, and the other representing the East. And there was a big divergence in what the 2 swarms came up with, which was fascinating to me. And it's if you apply that to associations, like if I look at, our associations are trying to deal with global issues. So if we take the issue of ocean pollution, right? It's a big issue for the Society of Naval and Marine Architects or Engineers. It's a big society for the Plastics Industry Association. I'm sure American Chemical Society is looking at it. But if I took a swarm from a group of engineers versus a swarm from a different group, I think I would come up with a very different answer, and maybe one that wouldn't be conducive to truly solving a world problem. So how, thinking about a global issue, I have two questions here. The first question being, how is it that you, if that was posed to you, what would that group look like? And
right.
the first part. And then the second part is, I'm very curious about scaling it as far as how big, is there a sweet spot for the size of the swarm?
Right. Right. So, well, let's answer the size question second, but this issue of different populations is really interesting. If you did build a swarm of engineers and ask them questions about a global issue, and you built a swarm of philosophers and you asked them the same question, you would get different answers. And because in some sense, when you build a swarm of engineers, you're building an artificial expert engineer. And your group of philosophers, you're building an artificial expert philosopher, and they're going to have different. They're going to be different, and that's actually interesting. You might actually want to know what are the perspectives of these different groups. If you want to get a more general answer, then having a more diverse group is better. So again, if you're trying to get kind of this general type of solution, getting a diverse group often very surprises us about how you get these very, very selfless moral decisions, which is actually really interesting. We did a project with Fast Company about a year ago. About a year ago, Jeff Bezos had tweeted out requests for what should he do with his fortune, for philanthropy. And he tweeted out, what should he do with, and he got like 50,000 tweets came back of like all these different ideas of what he should do with his fortune. And so we did this effort with Fast Company where we took the 50,000 and processed it, and there was a lot of overlap, and it came down to just a few hundred different ideas. And then we had a swarm of just people from the general public who went through these couple hundred ideas and narrowed it down and picked what would be the best use of the funds. And these were all the participants were Americans, and there were things on there that would be very attractive to Americans, like free healthcare for all Americans. It was like a suggestion, free medication for Americans. And yet, what the swarm came up with was clean water for everyone in the world. Which was really interesting because it was one of the choices that that really maybe had the least benefit to this population of who are Americans, whereas so many of the others maybe would have. And then like a few months later, the UN had their list of like top priorities, and clean water was like one of the very top. And so what we saw there was that you could take a group of people and have these insights come out that are, it's not just people picking in their self-interest. It's they really are giving answers that are best for the group as a whole. And that's another thing we see about swarms, is that they get people thinking about things in a different way because they really are part of a community. Whereas if you give people a poll or a survey, a poll or a survey actually is very isolating. You're giving a few pieces of data into a black box. And then if the answer comes back and it's not, what you put into the black box, you figure, well, nobody cared. Nobody cared what I said. But in a swarm, you're actually part of the process. And so even if the swarm goes to an answer that maybe you didn't have as your first choice, you have more buy-in because you were part of the process. So get to your second question. You asked about the size of the swarm. It's a really good question. It's something that we look at a lot. When we first started, we assumed you needed, 40 people, 50 people at least. We've looked at swarms of hundreds of people. We've seen academics do research studies which show that very, very small groups, even groups as small as 3 to 5 people as a swarm, can be statistically significantly smarter, more accurate. And so it could be a business team as small as 3 to 5. The Stanford Medical those were radiologists, 6 or 7 radiologists. Boeing, when it was military pilots, those were 4 or 5 military pilots. Or we've seen groups of 50, 100, 200. It really depends. Our recommendation is that if you have a group of experts, then a small group is pretty effective. It could be, we would recommend, 5 to 12 experts, and you can get really, really accurate results. If you're looking at a group of consumers or a group of people who have a broad, then 50 to 70 is a really good number. We found that if you go from 70 to 100, it's really not much of a benefit. So there's diminishing returns when you start going higher and higher. The one place where we do see an interest in doing large groups, and we haven't mentioned this, but and I know you have an interest in conferences, live events. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we also can do is we have the ability to have groups swarm in live events where they use their phone instead of a computer. And so the swarm is up on the screen at the front of the room. Everyone can pull out their phone. There, if you have 300 people in the room, you could have 300 people in the swarm. You don't necessarily need to have all 300, but part of it is just getting the engagement of the whole crowd.
So I just have to say that, yeah, that's awesome, because you just answered a question that we had over here on YouTube. Ron, who is with a very innovative healthcare organization in Chicago, was just asking, can you set up swarm activities at annual meetings? Can it combine both virtual and in-person participants? So
you absolutely can. I actually think it's most interesting when you do that, when you have a group of people in the room, and then there's also people just out there in the world who are also part of the swarm. And so you see this swarm up on the screen, and it could be people, but we absolutely can have live groups swarm. We've done some interesting projects. The X Prize Foundation did a live event where they had a bunch of their they call them visioneers. They're experts, and they were trying to decide on what are future contests that they should fund. Again, going to what are the world's big problems that they want to solve, and they used swarms live. We on a kind of completely different end of the spectrum, Credit Suisse last year they had their Asian investor conference, where they had people from all over the world who are experts in Asian markets, and they actually ran swarms like up in the front of the room, and they were actually forecasting what are the important trends in Asian markets that they should predict right there live in the room. Actually, the Credit Suisse example is also a case study that we have on our website.
Okay. That's great. I have seen a couple of questions that have to do with, I think, probably a question that you must get every single time, and that has to do with politics. Uh-huh. And it's so what does this mean could we use this for deciding things like political decisions or voting? And so how do you answer questions like that?
So I believe that there's a lot of value in using swarms for political decision making, mm-hmm. and I'm a believer that polling is a big problem for politics. Polling, my view is that polling is polarizing. Mm-hmm. What a poll does is it shows the differences in a population. It actually then reinforces those differences, and so the polling process gets groups to entrench. Swarming is really the opposite. Instead of revealing the differences in a population, it reveals where groups can agree, and it actually then reinforces the places where groups can agree. And so if you in nature, for example, honeybees have these difficult decisions. They have to decide where they're going to move their hive to. And if the group's entrenched the way we humans do for politics, they wouldn't decide, and that colony would just die out. And so I'm sure over millions of years, all the colonies that had this tendency to entrench died out. And so now that never happens with honeybees. They always can reach a decision, and so we can learn a lot from that. There's the swarming process can get rid of gridlock, can get rid of this entrenchment and allow groups to converge. We actually just started a project. We got a grant from, there's an organization called Nesta, which is a big British philanthropic organization, and we're actually looking at Brexit and looking at groups of voters in the UK, and can they agree on what's the right solution for them to get out of their Brexit mess? Because that's obviously for them, it's very hard for them to reach a decision that everyone can get behind, and there's a lot of different options. So it's actually a really interesting type of decision, but every country's faces similar things.
So this is an important one. Kiki, can associations afford this? This swarm would be awesome as part of our Future Think exercises. Where do we invest our innovation fund to make the biggest impact? Yeah. So, so what are the costs associated with looking at doing a swarm, having a swarm?
So, so the process is actually relatively affordable, and partly because we just launched a new SaaS platform where people can use the software themselves, and it's priced in some sense very similar to tools like Slack, where it's by user. So it's like $10 per user per month, and then groups can use it as much as they want, and whether they're asking one question or they're asking thousands of questions. And so it is our goal is to make it affordable and get groups using it.
Yeah.
And there's other ways of doing it, where it could be just a certain number of guests. If instead of having named users, there could be a certain number of guests. But the pricing's on our website, and it is really is intended to make it accessible to all organizations, big and small.
I'm sure everyone loves hearing that. Tracy, I want to take a second to say thanks so much for adding your questions and providing some additional perspective. I'm really trying to incorporate this into the association chat so that we can have a moment where we can collect questions from other people and kind of have our own representative of the swarm come on. And this was a perfect chance to do that. So thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So I guess we are getting close, and I wanted to ask you to maybe take a second and share a vision for where this could go. The thing is I know that you're constantly working on, making progress and developing and seeing new applications for it. So what would the future look like? And as we learn more about swarm intelligence and this human and AI powered decision making, where might that take us?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I feel like we're just at the beginning of this. This is a technology area where we're seeing real amplification of intelligence. We're seeing groups able to make forecasts and decisions that are 20%, 30%, 40% more accurate. I suspect that 5 years from now, we'll be looking back at that and saying, that was just the early steps of what we can do. And again, it goes back to this idea that people are really smart, and that the level of knowledge and intuition and experience that people have, really, it's untapped, and we really focus on how can we leverage that, how can we combine it, and how can we think about a business team as this collaborative intelligence that can be amplified. And so my hope is that as this technology matures, people will realize that it's really important to keep the human part of decision making active, and not take this kind of this trend towards just replacing people and automating decision making with algorithms. Again, I'm a firm believer in the power of AI.
Yeah,
it's just, you can't lose the human part of it, partly because you can't capture really what the opinions and values and sensibilities effectively in an algorithm, but partly also that just people know a lot, and we
Yeah.
we can just get better decisions. We can get better forecasts. We can get better insights by having people be part of the process.
I love this idea. The idea that somehow we can capture that mysterious thing that it is to be human, and some of that intelligence that's there that we don't, the closest thing we can do is call it what? Intuition. And yet, how do you account for that in a way that is practical and makes a difference? And when you combine it with the intelligence of other beings, other humans, I think it's just a really fascinating way to think about the way we make important decisions. So, any final words of wisdom? And if people want to find out more about your research and maybe how to talk with you about speaking to their groups or hosting a swarm, where can they find you?
Sure. So, our company is Unanimous AI. People can find us just at unanimous.ai. And at that website, there is, the software is called Swarm. People can go to the website. There's actually a 2-week free trial, so people can try it with their group, with their team. There's online help, so people who have questions. And then if anyone has questions about the stuff we've talked about today, if they send you questions, you can certainly email me, and I'm happy to email back. But our interest is getting groups to realize that they can take advantage of this technology, and associations are great, are
Yeah.
perfect. You have large groups, and they're diverse. I mean, one of the things that can happen in a small business team is they can get into an echo chamber where they all have the same views. An association is interesting because that breaks that. You have people who are from different organizations, different companies. They have different views, and then how do you combine them? And so it's a really, really good use.
I'm telling you, any association person who's listening to this right now knows we're in the middle of spring conference season. This would be a perfect time to start figuring out how you can pull something like this together. If not by when your conference is happening or your annual meeting's happening now, then in the fall, when fall conference season starts. And so I want to say thank you so much. I am so thankful that I not only got a chance to see what you did on that series, but then, your team is fantastic. You're fantastic. And just taking the time to talk with us today, I think it's incredibly important. And I want to say thanks to Tracy and everyone else who's watching right now. I hope you've learned something helpful today that's going to help you and help your organizations wherever you are. And please join us next time. Until next time, everyone, keep asking questions to learn every day. As Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. I hope you have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening to this episode of Association Chat. If you like it, please subscribe, or better yet, tell a friend. You can join the Association Chat book club or support Association Chat by visiting Association Chat's Patreon site. You can also find more information about live events, private communities, special projects, and more on associationchat.com. See you next time. Hey, Association Chat is in its 10th year and independently owned and produced by me, KiKi-L'Italien, and a very small crew of freelancers and volunteers. We appreciate our sponsors like you wouldn't believe. So I want to give a special thanks to all of our sponsors. Today, that includes Boulder, Event Waves, and Amplified Growth. Thanks to all of you. And if you want to find out more about sponsorship, then go to associationchat.com or email me, kiki@amplifiedgrowth.net, and we'll be happy to talk with you. All right, thanks.